I'll give us about 1 more minute and then we'll get started. All righty. Hello and welcome everybody to the first installment of the I Don't Know How series presented by the Center for Resilient Families at Arizona State University and Mental Health America. I'm Kendra Lucas, a research associate for Mental Health America, and I'll be your moderator for this webinar. In this first webinar, I don't know how to navigate my child's worries about bullying. We'll hear from parent advocates and experts about how a parent can recognize warning signs, seek resources, and become a resourceful ally to children starting the school year with social challenges. This webinar is being recorded and auto captions are enabled. Feel free to use the Q&A option at the bottom to ask questions, which I, myself, the panelists, or other staff we have on board will answer in chat. And if we have time, we'll pose some questions live to our panelists. While you're here, you can also use the chat function at the bottom, and we want to engage with you guys. So feel free to enter your name, where you're calling in from, and if you have any personal or professional experience with bullying that you're willing to share in chat. So while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers. So first we have Dr. Ruben Parra-Cardona, who is an associate professor at the Steve Hicks School of Social Work and Area Director of Research at the UT Austin Latino Research Institute. He has been funded by the National Institute of Mental Health and the National Institute on Drug Abuse to conduct the cultural adaptation of evidence-based parenting interventions programs for Latino immigrant families. Currently, he serves as a member of the board of directors of the Society for Prevention Research. Next, we have child psychologist Dr. Abigail Gewertz. In addition to being a mother of 4, she's also a leading expert on helping families cope with trauma, a foundation professor in the psychology department at ASU, and the author of When the World Feels Like a Scary Place, Essential Conversations for Anxious Parents and Worried Children. Dr. Gewertz has worked as a clinician, researcher, program developer, and trainer of providers, and is the author of more than 100 publications. A fellow of the Association for Psychological Science and the American Psychological Association, Dr. Gewertz has conducted research in the United States, Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, and has been invited to speak widely in the US and across the world on parenting in times of stress. And last but certainly not least, we have our parent advocate, Jamie Virgo. Jamie is a full-time working mom with 2 children, a 13-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter. She will share her son's experience with cyberbullying, as well as the in-person bullying he endured at school. She will discuss the many challenges she faced when working with the school, as well as the mental health impact not only on her son, but on the whole family. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and kick this discussion off, and feel free to continue engaging with us in the chat. So I want to start off a discussion with Jamie, just by hearing her personal testimony. So Jamie, can you tell us more about your child's experience with bullying? What signs did you notice, and how were you able to start that conversation with him?
So it really started after their fall break. I started noticing a few signs. His personality kind of changed. He went from being, he would spend time with the family, and then he started really isolating himself, staying in his room a lot. He didn't want to come out. He stopped doing the things he loved doing. He loves playing guitar and video games, and that just wasn't keeping his attention anymore. And then, he used to love going to school, seeing his friends, hanging out with them, his teachers, and then he would get so anxious and so upset about the thought of going to school that he was making himself physically ill. So he wasn't able to go to school. And so I started the conversation just by asking him what was going on. You know, I've noticed all these changes. He doesn't want to go to school anymore. He's not doing the things that he likes. So then that's when he told me that somebody had started spreading rumors about him. They were talking about him in class or in school. And then it started over text messaging. And then they were taking screenshots of things that got posted online on their social media. And then they started not only talking to the kids that were in his school, but kids that had left the school and gone somewhere else. So it wasn't just within his school anymore. It was now, you know, kind of out in the community with kids who are at different schools. And, you know, we don't know if they sent those text messages to other kids in their school that they didn't know. So, you know, by the end of all of this, he was really down to 2 or 3 friends left, when he was pretty much friends with everybody at school. You know, he'd been going there since kindergarten, so he knew everybody, and it really isolated his world, made it very small.
I am so sorry that happened to your son. Did you take any steps to try to rectify the situation?
Yeah. So the first thing we did was talked about it at home. You know, a lot of it was happening over his phone. He would get it at school, he would come home, and then he got it more at home. And there was no break from it. You know, the only time that he got a break from it was when he was sleeping. Otherwise, it was during school, when he got home, you know, people were sending him text messages and screenshots. And so it was never ending. So I suggested that we take a break from his phone, you know, take 2 weeks off. People have a short memory. Maybe they'll move on from it and you won't see it. And, you know, there was a lot of pushback at first. You know, he just had gotten a new cell phone. He was really excited. And then we were talking about taking it away, but he kind of decided maybe that was a really good idea, get a break from all of this. He could talk to his friends at school. I said, if you want to talk to him over the phone, we have a phone, but let's take a break from the phone. You know, we tried talking to him. You know, you tell him all the things that you're supposed to say, but it doesn't really make the anxiety just magically disappear. He still has it. So, and then we also talked to the school. They weren't really able to do much for several reasons. One, because it was over social media, the kids were using usernames, so we couldn't prove who was who. You know, they could bring the other parents in and say, hey, another parent is saying that your child is saying this, 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 and this. And they could just look at it and go, well, prove it's my kid. I mean, you don't know, it's them. They were doing it outside of school hours. So there really wasn't much that the school could do about the stuff that was happening online. And so we kind of ran into a roadblock there. We talked about, you know, some of the stuff that was going on in school at that time. Excuse me. But, you know, we didn't get a lot of help from the school. We would have meetings and they would say, you know, try to think of it from their perspective. Maybe they have some stuff that's going on at home that's really hard for them and they're not feeling good about themselves. So what they try to do is make you feel as bad as they feel. And so they were trying to, you know, get it from the other child's perspective, which I understand, but at the same time, it's not helping him out. And he was walking away thinking, well, you know, I know they're having a hard time, so I guess it's okay that they do these to me because they're having a hard time at home. Even though the school was saying it's not fair, you shouldn't have to put up with this. Yet at the same time, they're going, well, look at it from their perspective. So, you know, it was a lot of conversations back and forth with the school like that. And finally around Christmas break, they said, okay, we're going to have a discussion with the person who has started all these rumors and the screenshots and with the parents. And we're going to tell them, because this is a charter school, it's not a public school. You have the choice to come here. We have the choice to accept you. If you can't follow by our standards, then you're just going to have to find another school to enroll in. So.
Wow, it's amazing how much the school couldn't do. You know, schools are supposed to be a place where people go to learn, where they have support, where they feel like they can go to staff if they have any issues. And a lot of schools talk about how, you know, they have an anti-bullying policy, but when it comes to actually performing or actually doing something about it, we're met with these disappointing responses. So I'm so sorry that was your experience. It sounds like you took a lot of appropriate measures and you provided an ample amount of support for your son. Were these initial efforts to stop the bullying successful?
No. So they started after fall break, and then, you know, it was just a barrage of text messages, online posts, stuff on social media, and then screenshots of that shared around. And it really went on. It was up and down, but until about Christmas break. And then that's when the school finally said, okay, we've tried, you know, getting your son to think of it from a different perspective. We've given him all these different steps that he could take, like try ignoring them, try to stay away from them. If something happens, tell your teacher or tell the vice principal. And none of that was working. And they tried talking to the kid who started this, and they had multiple meetings with that child, you know, try to get them to change their behavior. Didn't stop. So that's when they finally had the meeting with that student and the parents. So then once winter break was over, everybody came back to school. That part of it really slowed down. But then, you know, that student pretty much left him alone. But now the friends of that student, the one who was doing the bullying, kind of picked up that role for that student. And then they started picking on him. But this time they didn't do anything online. They weren't sending him text messages. They weren't posting things online. It was all in school. But they were doing it in places where nobody else saw. You know, they would go up to him in classroom and whisper things into his ear, or they would do it during transitions between classes, or in the bathroom, or at lunch, you know. So it was places where nobody else saw what was going on. And, you know, we were back in the vice principal's office again, talking and telling them what was going on. But it was, you know, there was no direct threat of harm. They didn't threaten him. They didn't threaten anybody else at school. And there was no way to prove it because they were doing it where nobody else, we just couldn't prove it. So, you know, I had picked him up from school one day and he told me that they actually put their hands on him. They pushed him down. They were throwing rocks at him. A couple hit him. He even had a bruise on his back from one of them. He got hit in the back of the head with a rock. And, you know, I'm not quite sure, but nobody saw that. So back to the vice principal's office again, started talking to the vice principal. And so this time, they made sure to keep eyes on this kid, these couple kids, during lunch break and then the time that they have outside. And then they were actually caught. The vice principal saw what they were doing and immediately brought them in and talked to them, explained that kind of behavior is not acceptable. If they continue it, they're going to bring their parents in for a conference and then talk about their behaviors. And so their punishment for that was they had to sit downstairs in the morning until their electives were over and then they could join their class. So it lasted for a few days. They left him alone. We warned him, it might stay calm for a little while, but don't be surprised if it happens again. And it did. So the kids started back up again, had another meeting with the vice principal, and basically told them, if you can't stop this, if you can't get this under control, we're pulling him out of school for the rest of the year, and we're just going to find a new school. He shouldn't have to put up with this. I understand that other kids are going through other things, but we're not going to teach him that it's okay to be this perpetual victim and be constantly picked on. And I understand kids go through stuff, but they should also be taught that you can't take it out on other kids. It's not fair to him. He's gone from loving school to dreading school. He's making himself sick. So it was time then to put our foot down, and things just miraculously stopped after that.
Jamie, I'm so sorry that your son had to endure that without that proper support from the school. And, it didn't seem like the kids were being properly reprimanded for these actions. And, there was no real effort to kind of step in and kind of stop it. And so I really appreciate your persistence and how willing you were to back down. Do you have any regrets, or is there anything you wish you would have known before trying to mitigate the situation? Anything you wish you could have done differently?
That's a very good question. I wish that I had first asked, what are your bullying policies? Like, straight out tell me what is acceptable and what is not. I wish I just figured no bullying, that's not allowed. But so, what are their cutoff points? At what point are you going to have consequences for these other kids who are doing the bullying? I wish I had done more of my conversations over email. Most of my conversations were in person, so there was zero documentation on my end. The vice principal wrote down notes, but I didn't think to do it. I was so in the moment that I wasn't thinking, 5 steps ahead. So I wish I had done more of it online, so I would have had some sort of documentation for me. I also wish I would have told them that we were willing to unenroll them a lot sooner from their school. And we had the choice to keep them there. We have other choices for schools, so I wish I would have kind of pulled that card out a lot sooner. And I also wish we had talked to the teachers more. We had come up with plans with the vice principal, but I don't think that they always got communicated to the teachers, because, we had come up with this one plan. If something was happening, he would go to the teacher and say, may I use the restroom? And that they knew he needed to go talk to the vice principal. Well, he went to one of his teachers because one of the kids was throwing rocks at him. And he told the teacher, hey, so-and-so is throwing rocks at me. May I please go to the bathroom? And they said, no, you just need to stay away from him. Okay. So I think I wish I would have talked to the teachers more to make sure that they were on board with the plan as well. And then, sorry, a few things I wish I knew before going into these meetings with the school was, if I know now what they are, but if there was no threat of physical harm to anybody, they were just kind of like, well, we're going to work with the kids who are doing this as much as possible, but they're really not threatening him. They're not hurting him. So I wish I'd known that more. And then the last thing I could think of, it's really hard to track the social media bullying because of the usernames. They, everybody knows who they're talking to. But when it comes down to it, there was no way to prove who was who. We didn't have phone numbers or anything like that. It was just the usernames that they were using. So,
Jamie, I know reliving that situation was hard, but I really want to just thank you for volunteering to share that genuine testimony. It was heavy, but it's needed. And I'm sure that a lot of parents out there who are in similar situations were inspired by all the work that you put in to put a stop to it and that undying advocacy you had for your child. So everyone, please send your praises to Jamie in the comments for her bravery coming on today, telling her testimony. We really appreciate it. Um, and now that we've heard your story, I want to get some input from our experts, Abby and Ruben. Is there anything that stuck out to you from Jamie's story? Do you have any advice or tips you would give to parents in similar situations? And feel free, I don't care who goes, I'm not picky.
Want to go first, Abby, or want me to go first? I go? All right. Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. And first and foremost, Jamie, thank you so much for your courage, your resilience. I know it's been a heartbreaking phase of your life and your son's life, but the resilience and courage that you're communicating to us it's inspirational. So thank you. It requires a lot of heart and courage to be here. I know you talk about what you wish you had done, but I just want to make sure we don't let go of the pieces that you did right and that you were very brave. And the first and foremost is the emotional positive involvement with your son. You were close to him. And thinking about a prevention stance, we all who are parents and our children are exposed to this risk. And I think those many years of being involved with him turn out to a place where he trusted you with telling his story. And that's inspiring. So I just really want to highlight that. And that's the result of years of loving parenting. Also, your monitoring and supervision, you were attentive. You knew what was happening, you saw signs, and you follow through those. So right there, those essential parenting skills. But also there's a theory in family therapy, contextual family therapy, that tells that there needs to be a symmetry between parents and children. So parents need to be emotionally stronger than children, and in order to help them go through development. And you have been stronger than your kid in terms of leading the way to manage this situation and providing him with that source of strength that he needed. So I just want to highlight those strengths. I'll turn to other things about the next steps about the bullying and other stuff after Abby shares her thoughts. But I just wanted to share the strengths in what you did right. And I commend you, and you're an inspiration to us all for those actions that you took, and many of those that were planted for years and years of loving relationship with him.
Thank you.
And I really echo what Ruben just said. I mean, Jamie, what's I think so beautiful is that you really modeled that strength for your son. You advocated so hard for him, despite all the challenges that you had no control over, what the school did, what the other kids were doing, though all those kinds of things. And I think it really is inspirational. So thank you. And sort of just to put a point on some of the things that Ruben was talking about, you were obviously emotionally available for your son for so long. And what we know is that parents whose children who watch their kids, who listen to their children, who are able to emotionally coach their children, and I'll sort of just describe that in a bit, have children who are more likely to be able to develop the coping skills that enable them to, show the courage and the confidence and the competence to overcome these really awful challenges. And so, one of the things that you did was that you saw the changes in his behavior, and he told you about them. And a lot of kids, not just because of what happens in the family, but because of who they are. Some kids are more private than others, and so often it really is up to parents to watch what happens with their children and then to engage in the conversations that will allow children to be able to talk about what's going on with them. And the process of emotion coaching is that process. It's helping children to identify what they're feeling by looking at their expression on their faces and asking how they feel. You know, if they have a tummy ache, you know, you talked about physical symptoms, what they might be feeling, and then as a way to enter into a conversation about what happened. So really, you did a beautiful job in terms of coaching the emotions. And as Ruben said, there's so much more to talk about in terms of the larger system, but I'll hold on that for now.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'd like to compliment looking at the time, just final thoughts in terms of what to do. I think the advocacy that you did was exemplar within the reality that you had. And it's very important to be aware of dynamics of oppression. When there's an oppressive reality, there's, with oppressive systems that are not accountable, you see this phenomena of blaming the victim, right? Well, it's about your son, it's about you, nothing we can do. But that's where accountability comes in. And I really want to thank one of the participants that mentioned the resource of ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, which integrates federal, state, and local law enforcement. And, the advocacy needs to expand beyond the blaming the victim, right? Because you feel overwhelmed, the school is not helping. But it's how is it that I can expand that advocacy? But by reaching out to those that understand the dilemma that I'm in, that task force has successfully investigated cases of internet bullying and crime. So that's an example of how you expand and break through that blaming the victim. But it's very important that those with more power and privilege are accountable for that blaming the victim dynamic. It's not your task as a parent to break through that stuff. That should not be it. It's those who have more power and privilege, and involving other systems like law enforcement would be one way. And I just also want to mention that being attentive to the many types of bullying. In our case, we face a lot of bullying with immigration. We work with a lot of mixed status immigrant families, and after the election of the past administration, there were a lot of cases of build a wall. Many cases developed suicide prevention because children were bullied on that task. And so you have a social phenomena in conspiracy with that bullying. So just to highlight that you presented us a very heartbreaking, very tough case of bullying, but being very attentive to the many manifestations of bullying that occur according to the social events that we're living in society. So just wanted to highlight those thoughts.
And I can jump on that if, unless Kendra, there's something else that you want to know. Oh, so 100%, Ruben, thank you. And there's a few questions in the Q&A about what can we do? I think one thing that you highlighted so beautifully, Jamie, is, and I'll take it from the outer context because Ruben was talking about law enforcement into the individual context. So I think one of the things that you did so beautifully was try and hold the school accountable. And in your case, what was complicated was that it was a charter school, and charter schools, we all know, have much more limited resources than public schools. But schools must be held accountable, both for having a very clear definition of what constitutes bullying and also being very clear about what they will do about it. We do know that there are social emotional learning curricula in schools that really do change kids' behaviors, and I've seen a few comments in the chat about how to change the behaviors of bullies, and school-wide programs are effective at doing that if schools implement them. A lot of schools still don't implement them, but social emotional learning programs really help. And then in terms of with your child, and I think you did this also so beautifully, Jamie, there's a problem solving, sort of empowering your child enables not just validating, sort of helping them to identify how they're feeling and the fact that that sickness in their stomach relates to the fact that they're so anxious about going to school because they're going to be bullied, but engaging them in what can we do, what's within our control to do, right? The child's control and the parent's control, because unfortunately you can't problem solve anything that's in someone else's control. And so the example of going to the teacher, I think is a really beautiful example. And what children learn with a problem solving process, which might go something like, let's together, so parents and child, let's together talk about what we can do to help you feel better if something happens. And so it could be about feeling better, and it could also be about what the child does. And so it could be like taking a break, going to the restroom, or talk to a teacher. But the point here is that the child contributes. It's not just the parents and the teachers determining what happens, but the child then feels empowered in a situation where, I mean, ultimate bullying is the ultimate disempowerment. You don't,
Hmm.
it's terrifying because you don't know when it's going to happen. And the people who are supposed to protect you in the school environment aren't protecting you. So that problem solving, even if you feel, especially if the child feels very disempowered, is really so, so important.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that with that, Abby. You said it so well. Is breaking through the cycle of internalizing the oppression, right? Oh, it must be something about me as the teenager. It must be something about me as a parent. So breaking through that cycle and bringing that accountability through advocacy at different levels, teacher, school system, etc. It's very key in that process. So.
Awesome. I'm gonna pose a question actually that popped up in my head. We had a really good question about catering to children who are bullied, who also have special needs. So can either of you talk about that, or if there's anything we need to take into consideration for marginalized children that may not be or may have an even harder time in school just based on their identities? Can either of you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge is with children with special needs is that um, everything is heightened, right? And so I think one of the participants talks about children with autism who may have difficulty identifying emotions or even the actual bullying itself. And I think in those situations, parents are truly their children's best teachers, and parents of children with autism really have learned how to know how to communicate with their child. But the kind of the principles that we've been talking about really do hold for all kinds of children. With children with autism, with pervasive developmental disorders, the steps you have to take are smaller and more concrete. And so it might involve telling your child, this is bullying, and let me explain to you what bullying is. One, when someone puts their hands on you. Two, when someone says something that other people laugh at, that's bullying, right? When someone is mean or points a finger at you or makes a face at you, that's bullying. And so just being really concrete, and it really is also a developmental issue. So the younger your child, the more concrete you need to be. And every parent knows that your 5-year-old does not have the same understanding or ability to discuss things as your 12-year-old, as your 15-year-old. And of course, it's not that things get simpler because children can understand more when they're 15. They get more complicated because, of course, then it's very hard for you to track what's going on social media, and youth are more sophisticated, and the problems can get more complicated, as people have noted.
Awesome. Any other comments from our experts? Any other questions? Throw them in now. While we're waiting, I just want to extend my gratitude to all three of our panelists for joining us today. This has been a fruitful discussion thus far, and I really appreciate both that lived experience and that professional experience with bullying, because both of those perspectives are valuable. And I'm sure that a lot of parents are learning a lot or resonating a lot with this webinar. So just appreciate your time. If Let me double check. We touched a little bit on involving police. There's a question about David's law. I'm not familiar with that. Are any of our experts familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with the details of the law, but I
Me,
believe it
me
was
neither.
Texas, and it was one of the many, one of the several very well publicized and awful situations of children dying by suicide after being bullied. But I am not familiar with the details of the law.
Me
This is
neither.
okay. This is interesting. We do plan to have another installment of this on suicidal ideation, so maybe we can touch on that in the next webinar. Okay. If there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. I'll share my screen again. Technology. All right. Share screen. So once again, I want to extend my thanks to Ruben, Abby, and Jamie for volunteering their time. Thank you to the team at the Center for Resilient Families for collaborating with MHA, and to the attendees for joining. You'll find the contact information for myself and our wonderful panelists, as well as some links to free MHA resources, which I will also post in chat. Soon we'll be promoting the next part in the I Don't Know How series to premiere in late October, where the focus will be on suicidal ideation and prevention. We hope that you found this webinar valuable and that you enjoy the rest of your day. I'll send out a follow-up email to all attendees with information, how to get certificates of attendance, things like that soon. So just be on the lookout for that. Thank you guys again. I really appreciate it. Let me post these links in here.
Thank you, Kendra, and thank you, Jamie.
Thank you. Thank you both, and to all the participants.
Thank you for letting us tell our story.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.